The letter arrived at midnight, and it changed everything before the sun even rose. Duke Alistair Grayson stood in his study, with the paper trembling in his hand, not from fear, but from fury. The words on the page were simple, yet they threatened to destroy everything his family had built for 3 generations. His father's debts, hidden for years behind a proud smile and a well-kept estate, had finally come due. The banks wanted their money. His distant cousin, Edmund Carow, wanted the title, and the law, cruel and exact, gave Alistair only one way out. He had to be married within 30 days, or the entire Ravensworth estate would pass to Edmund by an old family clause neither man had taken seriously until now. 30 days. Alistair read the number again, hoping it might change. It did not. He was not a man who panicked easily. He had led men through storms at sea during his years in the Navy, had negotiated with hostile foreign officials, had buried his father with dry eyes because someone in the family needed to remain steady. But this letter shook him in a way nothing else had. A marriage, arranged in a matter of weeks, to save land and title, and the future of everyone who depended on him. He called for his steward before dawn. "There must be a way around this," Alistair said, pacing the length of his study as the fire cracked behind him. The steward, an older man named Harold Finch who had served 3 generations of Graysons, shook his head slowly. "I have checked every possible loophole, Your Grace. The clause is old, but it is airtight. Your father signed it himself, believing it would never matter. And yet here we are." "Here we are," Finch agreed quietly. Alistair sat down heavily in his chair. He thought of the noble daughters paraded before him every season, their mothers watching him like hawks circling prey, each one calculating how quickly they could secure a duke's fortune. He thought of the endless dinners where conversation felt like a performance, where every smile hid a motive. He had avoided marriage for exactly this reason. Now the very thing he had run from was the only thing that could save him. "I need someone who does not want anything from me," Alistair said finally, almost to himself. "Someone who will not scheme, who will not expect affection, who understands that this is business and nothing more." Finch hesitated. "There may be someone, Your Grace." Alistair looked up. "Who?" "Elena Marsh. She has served this household for nearly 6 years. She is honest, capable, and asks for nothing beyond her wages. The staff respect her greatly." Alistair frowned. "The maid?" "Yes, Your Grace." For a long moment, Alistair said nothing. The idea seemed absurd on its surface. A duke marrying a servant to solve a legal crisis. Society would talk. His cousin would mock him. And yet, the more he considered it, the more sense it made. A woman with no fortune to gain, no family name to elevate, no reason to pretend love where none existed. A clean arrangement, a business contract disguised as a marriage. "Send for her," he said. Elena Marsh arrived in the study an hour later, her hands folded neatly in front of her plain gray dress, her dark hair pulled back without a single strand out of place. She was not beautiful in the way society defined beauty, not adorned in silk or jewels, but there was something steady in her eyes that Alistair noticed immediately. She did not look nervous standing before a duke. She looked calm, almost curious. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" she asked. "Sit down, Miss Marsh." She did, though her posture remained straight, her hands still folded. Alistair explained the situation plainly, without softening the details. The debts, the clause, the 30 days. He watched her face carefully as he spoke, expecting shock, perhaps refusal, perhaps even laughter at the strangeness of the request. Instead, Elena listened with quiet attention, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a moment before speaking. "You want a wife who will not interfere in your life, who will manage the appearance of marriage, without asking for anything real from you." "Exactly," Alistair said, somewhat surprised by how quickly she understood. "And in exchange, financial security. A home. Protection under my name for the rest of your life, regardless of what happens between us afterward." Elena studied him for a long moment. Why me? It was a fair question, and Alistair respected her enough to answer honestly. "Because you do not want my title. You do not want my fortune enough to trap me for it. You are practical, Miss Marsh. I need practical." A faint, almost invisible smile crossed her lips, gone before he could be certain he had seen it. "You assume a great deal about what I want. Am I wrong?" She did not answer right away. Instead, She looked toward the window, where the early light was beginning to touch the gardens outside. What happens if I say no? Then I will find another way, though I confess I do not know what that way would be. Elena turned back to him. And if I say yes, you expect nothing further from me? No affection, no pretense beyond what is necessary in public? Nothing further, Alistair confirmed. This will be a marriage in name only. She considered this for a long moment, and Alistair found himself watching her closely, trying to understand what thoughts moved behind her calm expression. Finally she spoke. I will need time to think, Your Grace. You have one day, he said. I am sorry I cannot offer more. Elena rose from her chair, her composure unbroken despite the enormity of what had just been asked of her. One day will be enough. She left the study without another word, and Alistair sat alone for a long time afterward, staring at the fire, wondering if he had just found a solution or created a far greater problem than the one he already faced. The following morning, Elena returned to the study before he had even finished his breakfast. She stood in the doorway, her hands folded as they had been the day before, though something in her posture seemed different now, more resolved. I accept, she said simply. Alistair felt a strange mixture of relief and unease settle in his chest. You understand the terms fully? I understand them, Elena said. A marriage in name only, financial security in return, no expectations beyond appearances. Then we are agreed. We are agreed, she repeated. The wedding was arranged with startling speed, a small and quiet ceremony that raised eyebrows throughout the county the moment word spread. A duke marrying a household maid was not the kind of news that stayed quiet for long. Whispers began before the ink on the marriage certificate had even dried. Some called it scandalous. Others called it desperate. A few, more perceptive than the rest, wondered if there was something neither Alistair nor Elena were telling anyone. Alistair ignored the gossip as best he could, focusing instead on the practical matters of estate business, the debts that needed managing, the tenants who needed reassurance that nothing would change for them regardless of who sat beside him at dinner. He told himself repeatedly that this arrangement was temporary in spirit, if not in law, a solution to a problem, nothing more. Yet as he stood at the altar on the day of the ceremony, watching Elena walk toward him in a simple pale dress, her expression calm and unreadable as always, he felt an unexpected flicker of something he could not name. It was not love, he was certain of that, but it was not nothing, either. Elena reached him and looked up, meeting his eyes directly, without the shyness or nervousness he might have expected from someone in her position. Ready? She asked quietly, so only he could hear. Are you? He returned. I have been ready for far more difficult things than this, she said, and something in the way she said it made Alistair pause, though he did not have time to question her further before the ceremony began. The vows were exchanged quickly, the words familiar and hollow in Alistair's ears, promises he did not expect either of them to feel deeply. When it was over, when the small gathering of witnesses offered their polite applause, Alistair looked at the woman now legally bound to him as his wife, and realized he knew almost nothing about her beyond her competence and her calm. He did not yet know how much that calm was hiding. As they rode back to Ravensworth Hall in the carriage, sitting across from one another in silence, Alistair studied Elena's face in the fading afternoon light. She stared out the window at the passing countryside, her expression distant, as though her thoughts had traveled somewhere far beyond the estate they were returning to. You seem troubled, Alistair observed. Elena turned to him, and for a brief moment, something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked almost like fear, before it vanished behind her usual composure. Merely thinking about my new responsibilities, Your Grace. You may call me Alistair, given our circumstances. Alistair, then. She said his name carefully, as though testing how it felt. And I am simply Elena. Elena, he repeated. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the journey, but Alistair found his mind returning again and again to the strange flicker he had seen in her eyes, the sense that there was far more to his new wife than a household maid seeking financial security. He told himself it was nothing, that exhaustion and stress from the wedding had simply worn on her nerves. He did not yet understand that he had just married a woman carrying a secret large enough to reshape both of their lives, a secret she had guarded for years and would guard for as long as she possibly could, even from the husband she had just promised to stand beside. The carriage rolled through the iron gates of Ravensworth Hall as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grand stone building that was now, officially, Elena's home. She looked up at the towering structure, at the windows glowing faintly with candlelight, and took a slow, steadying breath. Whatever came next, she told herself, she would face it as she had faced everything else in her life. Carefully, quietly, and with the truth locked safely away where no one, especially not the Duke seated across from her, could ever find it. She did not know then how wrong she would prove to be. 3 weeks into the marriage, Elena stood in the estate office long after the household had gone to sleep, poring over a stack of ledgers that Alistair had left carelessly disorganized on his desk. She had not intended to look through his papers, but a torn page had caught her eye as she passed, and once she saw the numbers, she could not walk away from them. The candle beside her burned low as she traced her finger down a column of figures, frowning at an error that seemed to repeat itself across several pages. A tenant payment recorded twice. A shipment of grain marked as delivered when the corresponding invoice showed no such delivery had occurred. Small mistakes, easy to overlook individually, but together, they suggested either carelessness or something far more troubling. She was so absorbed in the numbers that she did not hear the door open. "You are still awake." Elena startled, nearly knocking over the candle as she turned to find Alistair, standing in the doorway, still dressed from a late meeting with his solicitor, his cravat loosened, and his expression tired. "Forgive me," she said quickly, rising from the desk. "I did not mean to intrude on your papers." Alistair stepped further into the room, his eyes moving from her face to the ledgers spread across the desk. "What were you looking at?" Elena hesitated, uncertain whether explaining herself would be seen as helpful or as an overstepping of the boundaries they had agreed upon. But something in her could not simply let the matter go unspoken. "There are errors in your accounts," she said finally. "Several of them. I do not believe they are accidents." Alistair's tired expression sharpened into something more alert. "What kind of errors?" She showed him the pages, pointing out the duplicate payment, the missing invoice, a pattern of small discrepancies that, added together over the past year, amounted to a significant sum of missing money. Alistair leaned over the desk beside her, studying the figures with growing concern. "Who manages these accounts?" he asked. "Your steward records the daily transactions, but someone else appears to have altered several entries afterward. The handwriting changes here, and here." Elena pointed to 2 specific lines, her finger steady despite the late hour. "Someone has been taking small amounts, disguised carefully enough that a quick review would miss them entirely." Alistair straightened, running a hand through his hair as he considered the implications. "How did you notice this? Finch has managed these books for years without complaint." "I have always been careful with numbers," Elena said simply. "It was part of my duties in the kitchen accounts before I came to work in the main household. Old habits remain." It was a reasonable explanation, and Alistair accepted it without further question, though something in the precision of her observations lingered in his mind. A household maid managing kitchen accounts might learn basic arithmetic, but the skill Elena had just demonstrated went far beyond simple sums. She had identified patterns across dozens of pages in a single evening, patterns that had apparently escaped his own notice for months. "I will speak with Finch tomorrow," Alistair said. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention." "Of course," Elena replied, already gathering the ledgers back into their proper order, her expression returning to its usual calm composure, as though the moment of insight had never happened. Alistair watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "You continue to surprise me, Elena. I am simply doing what is useful," she said, not looking up from her task. "Most people in your position would have said nothing at all, rather than risk overstepping." Elena finally met his eyes. "I have never believed in staying silent when silence causes harm." The words hung between them, carrying a weight that seemed to extend beyond the conversation about ledgers and missing money. Alistair found himself wanting to ask more, to understand what experiences had shaped a woman who spoke with such quiet conviction, who carried herself with more confidence than her circumstances seemed to warrant. But he held his tongue, reminding himself of the boundaries they had agreed upon from the beginning. "Good night, Elena," he said instead. "Good night, Alistair." She left the room with the same steady grace she carried everywhere, and Alistair remained behind, staring at the ledgers she had corrected, unable to shake the feeling that his new wife was far more than the simple household maid he had married out of necessity. The following days brought further small revelations, each one chipping away at Alistair's initial assumptions about the woman sharing his home. He noticed how she spoke to the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, not with the awkwardness of someone recently elevated above her former colleagues, but with an easy authority that seemed to earn immediate respect. He noticed how she handled a dispute between two tenant farmers over a boundary line, resolving the disagreement with a fairness and clarity that avoided weeks of potential conflict. He noticed, too, the way she sometimes lingered near the estate's small library, her fingers tracing the spines of books written in languages he did not expect a household servant to recognize, let alone read. One afternoon, as autumn rain fell steadily against the windows, Alistair found Elena in the library, seated near the fire with a worn leather book open in her lap. He paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment, before she noticed his presence.
"What are you reading?"
he asked. Elena looked up, and for the briefest moment, something like alarm crossed her face before she composed herself. She closed the book gently, though not before Alistair caught a glimpse of text that was clearly not written in English. "A book of poetry," she said. "I found it in the shelves. I hope you do not mind." "Not at all, though I confess I do not recognize the language." "French," Elena said smoothly. "I picked up a little during my years working in a household that employed a French cook. She taught me some words to pass the time." It was, again, a plausible explanation, delivered with the same calm confidence Elena brought to everything she said. But Alistair had spent enough of his life around diplomats and scholars to recognize the difference between someone who had picked up a few kitchen phrases and someone who read fluently, effortlessly, the way one reads a native tongue. He said nothing, however, choosing instead to sit in the chair across from her, the fire crackling between them. "May I ask you something personal?" he said after a moment. Elena's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "You may ask." "Where are you from originally? Your accent carries something I cannot quite place, something beneath the accent you use with the staff." For a long moment, Elena said nothing, and Alistair wondered if he had finally pressed too far into territory she was unwilling to share. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I have lived in many places," she said. "A person absorbs pieces of every place they have been. I do not think there is anything unusual in that." "Perhaps not," Alistair conceded, though he did not entirely believe her answer. They sat in silence for a while longer, the rain continuing to fall outside, the fire casting warm light across the room. Alistair found himself studying Elena's profile as she stared into the flames, wondering what thoughts occupied her mind, what history she carried so carefully hidden beneath her calm exterior. "You ask a great many questions for a man who wanted a marriage of convenience," Elena said eventually, a faint note of amusement in her voice. "Perhaps I did not anticipate how curious my convenient wife would turn out to be," Alistair replied. Elena smiled then, a real smile, brief but genuine, the first he had seen from her since the day they married. "Perhaps you should have considered that possibility before proposing such an arrangement." "Perhaps I should have," Alistair agreed, surprised to find himself smiling in return. It was a small moment, insignificant on its surface, yet it lodged itself firmly in Alistair's memory over the following days. He found himself looking for reasons to seek Elena out, to ask her opinion on estate matters, to observe the quiet competence with which she navigated a world that had, until recently, kept her firmly beneath its notice. Mrs. Higgins noticed the change as well, though she was wise enough not to comment on it directly to the Duke himself. Instead, she mentioned it quietly to Finch one evening, as they shared tea in the servants' hall. "Her Grace has a way about her," Mrs. Higgins said, using the title with a warmth that suggested genuine respect rather than obligation. "She handles the staff fairly, she notices things others miss, and she carries herself like someone who has known far grander halls than this one, whatever her past may have been." Finch nodded slowly, stirring his tea in thoughtful silence. "I have wondered about her myself. There is a precision to her that seems unlikely for a woman raised in service. Do you think His Grace has noticed?" "I think," Finch said carefully, "that His Grace notices a great deal more than he lets on." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a letter, delivered late by a rider who had traveled from a neighboring estate. The letter was addressed to Alistair, but it carried the seal of Edmund Carow, the cousin whose ambitions for the Ravensworth title had been thwarted by the sudden marriage. Finch carried the letter to the study himself, finding Alistair still awake, reviewing correspondence by candlelight. "A letter from your cousin, Your Grace," Finch said, placing it carefully on the desk. Alistair broke the seal with a frown, already anticipating the bitterness he expected to find within. The words did not disappoint his expectations, though they carried a sharper edge than he had anticipated. Edmund's letter congratulated him on his marriage, in tones dripping with sarcasm, questioning the wisdom of elevating a household servant to the position of duchess, suggesting that society would never fully accept such a match, and hinting, in carefully vague language, that he intended to look more closely into the circumstances surrounding the sudden wedding. Alistair set the letter down, his jaw tightening. "Trouble, Your Grace?" Finch asked. "My cousin does not accept defeat gracefully," Alistair said. "He intends to search for weaknesses in my marriage, hoping to find grounds to challenge its legitimacy." "Is there any such weakness to be found?" Alistair thought of Elena's careful evasions, her fluent French, the flicker of fear he had seen cross her face when he asked about her origins. He thought of the confidence she carried, so at odds with the humble position she had occupied for years within his own household. "I do not know," he admitted quietly, "but I intend to find out before my cousin does." The rain continued outside, steady and unrelenting, as Alistair sat alone in his study long into the night, turning Edmund's letter over in his hands, wondering what secrets his convenient marriage had truly brought into his home, and whether those secrets would prove to be his salvation or his undoing. Edmund Caro arrived at Ravensworth Hall, uninvited, on a grey morning in late October, his carriage rolling through the gates with the confidence of a man who believed he still had claims to the property within. Alistair received him in the drawing room with cold civility, offering tea he had no intention of drinking himself. "You look well, cousin," Edmund said, settling into a chair without being asked. "Marriage seems to agree with you, though I confess I was surprised by your choice of bride." "I did not marry to please you, Edmund." "No, I imagine not." Edmund's smile did not reach his eyes. "Tell me, where is the new duchess? I should like to offer my congratulations in person." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Elena appeared in the doorway, dressed simply but elegantly in a dark blue gown that Alistair had insisted she order from the finest dressmaker in the county. She paused for a moment, her eyes moving between the two men, before stepping fully into the room. "Mr. Caro," she said, her voice perfectly composed, "I understand you have come to offer your congratulations." Edmund rose, studying her with an intensity that made Alistair's jaw tighten. "Indeed, though I must say, you carry yourself with more grace than I expected from someone of your former position." "Thank you," Elena replied smoothly, choosing to interpret the backhanded comment as a genuine compliment. "I find that grace has little to do with birth, and everything to do with practice." Edmund's smile faltered slightly at her composed response, clearly having expected either embarrassment or defensive anger, neither of which Elena offered him. He recovered quickly, however, turning his attention back to Alistair. "I have heard the strangest rumor," Edmund said casually. "Someone mentioned seeing your wife exchange words in French with a merchant visiting the county last month. Fluent French, they said, spoken like a native. Peculiar skill for a household maid. Would you not agree?" Alistair felt his pulse quicken, though he kept his expression neutral through years of practiced discipline. Elena, for her part, showed no outward sign of alarm, though Alistair had come to recognize the subtle tightening around her eyes that indicated tension she refused to display openly. "I have picked up various languages over the years," Elena said calmly. "It has proven useful in managing correspondence for the estate." "How resourceful," Edmund said, his tone suggesting he did not believe her explanation for a moment. "I do so love a woman of hidden talents. One wonders what other secrets might be hiding beneath such an ordinary appearance." "That will be quite enough, Edmund," Alistair said sharply, his patience finally reaching its limit. "You came to offer congratulations. You have offered them, however insincerely. I believe your visit has concluded." Edmund rose slowly, unbothered by the dismissal. "Of course, cousin. I would not wish to overstay my welcome." He turned to Elena one final time, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It has been most illuminating meeting you, Your Grace. I have a feeling we shall speak again soon." After Edmund's carriage disappeared down the long drive, Alistair turned to Elena, who remained standing near the window, watching the departing vehicle with an unreadable expression. You handled him well, Alistair said. He is not a man who accepts defeat easily, Elena replied. He will continue searching for weaknesses. Is there anything he might find that could cause us trouble? The question hung in the air between them, and for a long moment, Elena did not answer. When she finally turned to face him, her expression had shifted into something more guarded than Alistair had seen from her before. Everyone has a past, Alistair. Mine is simply my own to share when I am ready, not because your cousin demands it. It was not a denial, and Alistair noticed the distinction immediately. He wanted to press further, to ask directly what she was hiding, but something in her expression convinced him that pushing too hard would only drive her further into silence. I am not asking you to share anything before you are ready, he said instead, but I would ask that you trust me enough to warn me if there is danger coming, whether from Edmund or from anywhere else. I cannot protect what I do not understand. Elena studied him for a long moment, something softening slightly in her expression. I appreciate that, Alistair, truly. But some truths are heavier than they appear, and I am not certain you are prepared to carry the weight of mine. Try me, he said quietly. She almost told him then. He could see it in the way her lips parted slightly, the way her eyes searched his face, as though weighing whether he could be trusted with whatever burden she carried. But the moment passed, and she shook her head gently. Not yet, she said. Please, not yet. Alistair nodded, respecting her wishes despite the growing unease in his chest. Not yet then, but someday, Elena. Someday, she agreed softly. Over the following weeks, life at Ravensworth Hall settled into an unexpected rhythm. Alistair found himself seeking Elena's company more frequently than their original arrangement had anticipated, drawn not by obligation, but by genuine interest in her insights and opinions. She accompanied him on visits to tenant farms, where her quiet observations often revealed problems he had overlooked. She sat with him during long evenings reviewing estate finances, her sharp mind catching discrepancies, and suggesting improvements that steadily strengthened the estate's fragile position. Their conversations, once limited to practical matters, gradually expanded into territory neither of them had anticipated when they agreed to their arrangement. Alistair found himself telling her about his years in the Navy, about the storms he had survived, and the friendships he had lost. Elena listened with genuine attention, occasionally offering thoughtful questions that revealed a depth of understanding about leadership and sacrifice that surprised him each time. In turn, though she remained guarded about specific details of her past, Elena began sharing small fragments of herself. She spoke of her love for languages, though she never fully explained how she had come to learn them. She spoke of her belief in fairness, in treating every person with dignity, regardless of their position in society, a philosophy that seemed to run deeper than simple kindness, as though it had been earned through hard experience rather than simply taught. One evening, as they walked together through the estate gardens, the last of autumn's leaves crunching beneath their feet, Alistair found himself studying Elena's profile in the fading light. "May I ask you something?" he said. "You may always ask," Elena replied, though they both understood this did not guarantee an answer. "Do you regret agreeing to this marriage?" Elena paused in her walking, turning to face him fully. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I wonder sometimes if I trapped you in an arrangement that has become more complicated than either of us anticipated. I wonder if you long for a life where you are not required to hide parts of yourself, where you might have married someone who already knew everything about you before making promises." For a long moment, Elena said nothing, her eyes studying his face with an intensity that made Alistair's chest tighten with anticipation. "No," she finally said. "I do not regret it. Whatever complications have arisen, whatever secrets remain unspoken between us, I have found something here I did not expect to find." "What is that?" "Safety," Elena said quietly. "And perhaps something more than safety, though I am still learning to trust that feeling." Alistair felt something shift within his chest at her words, a warmth he had not expected to feel toward the woman he had married, purely out of necessity. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his, and Elena did not pull away. "I feel it too," he admitted. "Whatever this has become, I no longer think of it as merely a marriage of convenience." "Neither do I," Elena whispered. They stood together in the fading autumn light, hands intertwined, neither speaking further, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them, even as the shadow of unspoken secrets continued to loom over their growing connection. That night, unable to sleep, Alistair found himself wandering the halls of Ravensworth, eventually finding his way to the small study where he had first learned of the ledger discrepancies weeks earlier. He lit a candle and sat at the desk, staring at nothing in particular, his thoughts consumed by Elena and the mystery she carried so carefully within her. He noticed, as he sat there, a small wooden box tucked into the back corner of a bookshelf, one he had never paid attention to before. Curiosity got the better of him, and he retrieved it, finding it locked with a small brass mechanism that seemed designed more for privacy than true security. He hesitated, knowing he was crossing a line by even considering opening something so clearly personal and hidden. But his hesitation lasted only a moment before he set the box aside, unopened, ashamed of the impulse that had nearly led him to violate the trust he was trying so carefully to build with his wife. Instead, he returned the box to its place on the shelf and resolved to wait, as he had promised Elena he would, until she was ready to share her truth on her own terms. He did not yet know that fate, and his cousin's relentless ambition, would not allow them the luxury of waiting much longer. The following morning brought news that would test the fragile trust they had built. A messenger arrived from town, carrying word that Edmund had been seen meeting privately with a solicitor known for handling matters of inheritance disputes and marriage annulments. The implications were clear enough that Alistair felt a cold dread settle into his stomach the moment Finch relayed the information. "He is building a case," Alistair said, pacing his study with renewed urgency. "He intends to challenge the legitimacy of my marriage." "On what grounds, Your Grace?" Finch asked. "I do not know precisely, but I suspect it relates to Elena's background. If he can prove she deceived me about her true identity or history, he may argue the marriage was founded on fraud." Finch's expression grew grave. "Do you believe Her Grace has deceived you in any meaningful way?" Alistair thought carefully before answering, remembering the flickers of alarm he had seen in Elena's eyes, the careful evasions, the fluent French she claimed to have learned from a cook. "I believe she is hiding something significant. Whether that constitutes deception in a way that could truly threaten our marriage, I cannot say." "Then perhaps it is time to ask her directly," Finch suggested gently, "before your cousin forces the truth into the open in a manner far less kind than you might offer." Alistair knew Finch was right, even as the thought of pressing Elena for answers she had asked him not to seek yet filled him with reluctance. He did not wish to break the trust they had so carefully built, yet the growing threat from Edmund left him little choice but to understand exactly what danger they might be facing. He found Elena in the garden that afternoon, tending to a small patch of flowers that had somehow survived the early frost. She looked up as he approached, and something in his expression must have alerted her to the seriousness of what he had come to discuss. "What has happened?" she asked immediately. "Edmund has been meeting with a solicitor who specializes in annulments," Alistair said without preamble. "I believe he intends to challenge our marriage on the grounds of deception." Elena's face paled slightly, though she remained otherwise composed. "I see. Elena, I need to understand what he might find. Not because I doubt you, but because I cannot protect us from a threat I do not comprehend." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the flowers in her hands, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. When she finally looked up, her eyes carried a weight of exhaustion that Alistair had never seen from her before. "There is more to my past than I have told you," she said softly. "Far more than you likely suspect. And I fear that once you know the truth, everything between us will change, in ways I cannot predict." "Tell me," Alistair said gently. "Whatever it is, we will face it together." Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself for what felt like the most difficult confession of her entire life. But before she could speak another word, the sound of an approaching carriage interrupted the moment, and both of them turned to see Edmund's familiar vehicle, rolling once again through the gates of Ravensworth Hall, far sooner than either of them had anticipated his return. "He is early," Elena whispered, panic flickering briefly across her features before she forced it back into submission. "Whatever I was about to tell you will have to wait a little longer." "Elena. Please, Alistair, trust me a little longer. I promise you will know everything soon." Reluctantly, Alistair nodded, though the unease in his chest only grew heavier as Edmund's carriage came to a stop before the grand entrance of the hall, carrying with it whatever new complications his cousin intended to unleash upon their fragile, growing bond. Edmund stepped down from his carriage with a satisfied expression that immediately put Alistair on guard. Beside him emerged a thin man, dressed in the somber black of a solicitor, carrying a leather case that seemed heavier than its size suggested, as though it contained the weight of accusations rather than mere paper. "Cousin," Edmund called out cheerfully as he approached, "I hope you do not mind the intrusion. I have brought someone I believe you should meet." Alistair stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Elena, without consciously deciding to do so. "Edmund, this is becoming tiresome. State your business plainly." "Very well." Edmund's smile widened. "This is Mr. Pratt, a solicitor who specializes in matters of inheritance and marital law. I have asked him to review the circumstances of your rather hasty wedding." Mr. Pratt cleared his throat nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation he had been thrust into. "Your Grace, I have simply been asked to examine certain documents pertaining to the legality of your recent marriage. Nothing more." "And what documents might those be?" Alistair asked, his voice carrying a warning edge that made the solicitor shift uncomfortably. "Records of employment," Edmund interjected before Pratt could answer. "Your wife's history within your household, prior to your marriage. Any documentation regarding her origins before she entered service." Alistair felt Elena tense beside him, though she said nothing, her composure held together by what he could only assume was sheer force of will. "My wife's history is not your concern, Edmund." "Ah, but it is, cousin, if that history reveals fraud in the securing of your marriage. The clause governing your inheritance requires a legitimate marriage entered into honestly. If it can be shown that your wife concealed her true identity, or history, in a manner that deceived you into the union, the marriage itself could be declared invalid." "That is absurd," Alistair snapped. "I knew precisely who I was marrying." "Did you?" Edmund's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "Then perhaps you can tell me, Your Grace, precisely where your wife was born, who her parents were, and what circumstances led a woman of such evident refinement and education into a life of household service." The silence that followed was damning in its length. Alistair opened his mouth to answer, only to realize he genuinely could not provide any of the details Edmund was demanding. He knew nothing of Elena's parents, nothing of her birthplace, nothing beyond the 6 years of service she had provided to his household before their sudden marriage. Elena finally stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of her body. "My history is my own business, Mr. Caro. It has no bearing on the legitimacy of my marriage, or my devotion to my husband's household." "Perhaps not," Edmund said smoothly. "But mysteries have a way of unraveling, Your Grace, especially when there is sufficient motivation to unravel them, and I assure you, I have considerable motivation." He turned to Mr. Pratt. "Proceed with the investigation as we discussed." "This is harassment," Alistair said sharply. "You have no legal standing to investigate my wife's private history. On the contrary, cousin, as the next heir should your marriage be invalidated, I have every legal standing to ensure that marriage is genuinely legitimate. I am merely protecting the family's interests, as any responsible relative would." Alistair's hands clenched into fists at his sides, years of naval discipline the only thing preventing him from responding with the physical anger boiling beneath his controlled exterior. "Get off my property, Edmund, now." Edmund bowed with exaggerated politeness. "Of course, cousin. We shall speak again soon, once Mr. Pratt has completed his research." He turned to Elena one final time, his expression carrying a satisfaction that made Elena's blood run cold. "It has been most enlightening, Your Grace. I suspect our next conversation will prove even more so." The carriage departed, leaving Alistair and Elena standing alone in the courtyard, the weight of the confrontation settling heavily between them. "He will find out," Elena said quietly, staring at the empty drive where the carriage had disappeared. "Given enough time and resources, he will uncover everything I have spent years trying to hide." "Then tell me now," Alistair urged. "Before he does, whatever the truth is, I would rather hear it from you than from my cousin's investigation." Elena closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "Not here. Not in the open, where anyone might overhear." They walked together in silence back into the house, Elena leading them to a small private sitting room, rarely used by the household staff, ensuring they would not be interrupted or overheard. She closed the door carefully behind them before turning to face Alistair, her expression carrying a vulnerability he had never witnessed from her before. "What I am about to tell you will change how you see me," she said. "I need you to understand that everything I did to survive, not to deceive you specifically. I understand, Alistair said gently. Please, Elena, whatever it is. She took a deep breath, her hands twisting together nervously in a rare display of the anxiety she had kept so carefully hidden since the day they met. My name was not always Elena Marsh. Alistair's breath caught, though he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I was born Elena Whitmore, daughter of the Earl of Camden. The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Alistair simply stared at her, trying to process the enormity of what she had just revealed. A household maid, married for convenience, was in truth the daughter of an earl, a woman of noble birth who had somehow ended up serving in his household without his slightest suspicion. How, he finally managed. How does the daughter of an earl end up working as a household maid? Elena's expression grew distant, her eyes carrying the weight of memories she had clearly worked hard to bury. My father arranged a marriage for me when I was 17, to a man twice my age whom I had never met, in order to settle a business alliance that would benefit his estate financially. I refused. My father, in his fury, threatened to force the marriage regardless of my wishes, using whatever means necessary to ensure compliance. So you fled, Alistair said quietly, beginning to understand. I fled, Elena confirmed. I took what little money I had saved, disguised myself as a common woman seeking employment, and disappeared into service, believing it was the only way to escape a future I could not accept. I changed my name, altered my manner of speech, and worked to erase every trace of the education and refinement that might reveal my true origins. And your family, do they know where you are? Elena shook her head. They believe I disappeared entirely, perhaps drowned, or lost to misfortune during my flight. I have not contacted them in over 6 years, for fear that any communication might reveal my location and force me back into the marriage I refused. Alistair sat down slowly, absorbing the full weight of her confession. The French you speak so fluently, the education you display, the confidence with numbers and diplomacy, all of it comes from your true upbringing as an earl's daughter. Yes, Elena admitted. I have spent years trying to hide it, to become someone unremarkable enough that no one would ever suspect the truth, and I nearly succeeded, until your cousin's suspicions threatened to unravel everything. Why did you not tell me before we married? Alistair asked, though his tone carried no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Because I feared what it would mean, Elena said honestly. If you knew I was the estranged daughter of an earl, fleeing an arranged marriage, you might have refused the union entirely, fearing legal complications or scandal. Or you might have seen me differently, not as a practical solution to your problem, but as a liability carrying dangerous secrets. I could not risk either outcome when so much depended on our arrangement succeeding. Alistair reached out, gently taking her hands in his own, feeling them tremble slightly beneath his touch. Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, uncertainty and fear evident in their depths. I am not angry, Alistair said firmly. I understand why you kept this hidden. You were protecting yourself from a danger far greater than anything I could have posed. If anything, I admire the courage it must have taken to walk away from everything you knew, to build an entirely new life, through sheer determination and intelligence. Relief flooded Elena's expression, though it was quickly followed by renewed anxiety. But Edmund will find this. His solicitor is thorough, and my father, though I have avoided him for years, is not a man without resources or connections. If word reaches him that I have resurfaced, married to a duke, he may attempt to reclaim authority over me, or worse, revive the arranged marriage I fled in the first place. We will face that possibility together, Alistair said firmly. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone. Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, finding none. Why do you care so much? Our marriage began as nothing more than a practical arrangement. Perhaps it did, Alistair admitted. But it has become something else entirely, at least for me. I do not know precisely when the shift occurred, but I find myself caring for you far beyond the boundaries we originally agreed upon. The confession hung between them, as significant in its own way as the truth Elena had just revealed about her past. For a long moment, neither spoke, both absorbing the magnitude of what had shifted between them, from practical strangers, bound by necessity, to something far more complicated and far more real. I care for you as well, Elena finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I ever anticipated feeling for the man I married purely to save myself from destitution. Alistair leaned forward, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might close the remaining distance between them entirely. But the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway outside interrupted the moment, and both of them straightened as Finch knocked urgently on the door before entering, without waiting for permission. "Your Grace," Finch said, breathless from apparently running through the house. "Forgive the interruption, but a visitor has arrived, and I believe you will want to receive him immediately." "Who is it, Finch?" Finch hesitated, glancing briefly at Elena before answering. "He gives his name as Lord Percival Ashford, Your Grace. He claims urgent business concerning Her Grace's family." Elena's face drained of color entirely, her hands gripping Alistair's with sudden desperate strength. "Percival Ashford," she whispered. "He served as a diplomat in my father's household. If he has found me, my father cannot be far behind." Alistair rose immediately, his protective instincts overriding every other concern. "Show him to the drawing room, Finch. We will receive him together." As they walked toward the drawing room, Elena's hand trembling within his own, Alistair understood with sudden clarity that whatever secrets had brought them together, and whatever secrets still remained unspoken, their carefully constructed arrangement was about to face its greatest challenge yet, one that threatened not merely their marriage, but Elena's very freedom and safety. Lord Percival Ashford stood near the fireplace in the drawing room when Alistair and Elena entered, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and the polished manner of someone accustomed to navigating delicate diplomatic situations. He turned as they entered, and his eyes widened slightly at the sight of Elena, recognition flooding his expression before he quickly composed himself into a formal bow. "Lady Elena," he said, his voice carrying genuine warmth despite the formality of the greeting. "It has been 6 long years. I confess I feared the worst when you vanished so completely." Elena's grip on Alistair's arm tightened, though her voice remained remarkably steady when she responded. "Lord Ashford, I did not expect to see you again. Nor I you, under such circumstances." Ashford's gaze shifted to Alistair, taking in the protective stance the Duke had adopted beside his wife. "Your Grace, I apologize for the abruptness of my visit. I only recently learned of Lady Elena's marriage through channels I would rather not discuss in detail, and I felt compelled to see the truth with my own eyes." "You knew my wife before our marriage," Alistair said, though it was more statement than question. "I served as a diplomatic advisor to the Earl of Camden for many years," Ashford explained. "I watched Lady Elena grow from a curious child into a remarkably accomplished young woman, fluent in 3 languages before her 16th birthday, possessing a mind for numbers and negotiation that many grown men in the diplomatic service would envy." Elena flushed slightly at the praise, though her expression remained guarded. "That was a long time ago, Lord Ashford. I am no longer that person." "Are you not?" Ashford studied her carefully. "I find that difficult to believe, given what I witnessed just now, in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak. Some things cannot be entirely erased, no matter how thoroughly one attempts to hide them." "Why have you come here?" Alistair asked directly, cutting through the pleasantries to address the concern most pressing to his mind. "Does the Earl of Camden know his daughter's whereabouts?" Ashford's expression grew more serious. "Not yet, Your Grace, though I fear that circumstance may not remain true for much longer. I learned of Lady Elena's marriage through a rather indiscreet conversation between your cousin's solicitor and a clerk who happens to be an old acquaintance of mine. Mr. Carow has been making inquiries that, if pursued much further, will inevitably lead back to the Earl of Camden's household and the scandal of his daughter's disappearance." Elena's face had grown increasingly pale throughout this explanation. "If my father learns where I am, he will not simply let the matter rest. He has spent 6 years believing me lost or dead, but if he discovers I am alive and married to a duke, he may see opportunity in the situation, rather than relief." "What kind of opportunity?" Alistair asked. "My father is not a sentimental man," Elena said bitterly. "He values connections and alliances above all else. If he learns I am now a duchess, he may attempt to use that connection to his advantage, regardless of the years of silence and abandonment that preceded it. Or worse, he may still consider the arranged marriage I fled from to remain valid in some fashion, creating legal complications that could threaten everything we have built here." Ashford nodded gravely. I share your concern, Lady Elena, which is precisely why I felt it necessary to warn you directly, rather than allow you to be surprised by whatever your father might attempt. I have maintained a genuine fondness for you since your childhood, and I could not in good conscience remain silent while you faced this threat unprepared. I appreciate the warning, Lord Ashford, Elena said, some of the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Truly, but I must ask, what do you believe my father intends to do, now that Mr. Caro's inquiries threaten to expose my location? I cannot say with certainty, Ashford admitted. But I know the Earl of Camden well enough to suspect he will not simply accept the situation quietly. He may attempt to contact you directly, or he may seek legal counsel of his own to challenge the validity of your marriage, particularly if he still considers you bound by the arrangement you fled 6 years ago. Alistair felt a cold determination settle over him as he absorbed this information. Then we must prepare accordingly. Elena's safety and our marriage's legitimacy cannot be left vulnerable to whatever schemes either my cousin or her father might devise. A wise approach, Your Grace, Ashford agreed. If I may offer some assistance, I retain certain connections within the legal community that specialize in matters of this delicate nature. I would be honored to help however I can, both for the sake of an old friendship and because I believe Lady Elena deserves happiness after everything she endured before her flight. Elena studied Ashford carefully, years of caution warring with genuine gratitude for his apparent loyalty. Why would you risk involving yourself in this matter, Lord Ashford? My father is not a man who forgives easily those who cross his interests. Because, Ashford said simply, I watched you grow up in a household that valued you only for the alliances you might secure, never for the remarkable person you actually were. When you disappeared, I grieved not merely the loss of an acquaintance, but the loss of someone I genuinely believed deserved better than the fate your father had planned for you. If I can help ensure that better fate now, 6 years later, I would consider it one of the finer accomplishments of my career. Elena's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion at his words, and Alistair found himself grateful for the unexpected ally who had appeared amid the mounting threats to their marriage. Thank you, Elena said softly. Your kindness means more to me than you likely realize. Then let us discuss how best to protect you and your husband from whatever storm may be approaching, Ashford said, gesturing toward the chairs arranged near the fireplace. Time, I fear, is not on our side in this matter. They spent the following hours in careful discussion, mapping out potential strategies for addressing both Edmund's investigation and the possibility of the Earl of Camden's involvement. Ashford provided valuable insight into the Earl's likely thinking and potential legal vulnerabilities, while Alistair contributed his own understanding of the marriage clause that had originally necessitated his hasty union with Elena. Through it all, Elena remained largely quiet, absorbing the discussion with the same careful attention she brought to everything, though Alistair could see the weight of the conversation pressing heavily upon her. When Ashford finally departed as evening approached, promising to return with legal counsel within the week, Elena remained standing near the window, watching his carriage disappear down the long drive. You are troubled, Alistair observed, moving to stand beside her. I spent 6 years building a life where my past could not touch me, Elena said quietly. Now, in the span of a single day, that carefully constructed wall has crumbled entirely. I do not know how to face a future where my father's shadow looms over everything we have built here. We will face it together, Alistair reminded her gently, as we agreed. Elena turned to look at him, her expression carrying a vulnerability that seemed to strip away every layer of careful composure she had maintained since the day they first met. Alistair, I need you to understand something. If my father does pursue legal action, if he attempts to reclaim authority over me, or challenge our marriage, the scandal that follows could damage your reputation as severely as it damages mine. You could still choose to distance yourself from this situation, to protect your own position rather than risk everything for a woman whose complications you did not anticipate when you agreed to this arrangement. Do you truly believe I would abandon you now? Alistair asked, something fierce entering his voice. After everything we have shared these past weeks, after finally understanding the full weight of what you have carried alone for 6 years, I do not know what to believe anymore, Elena admitted honestly. Our marriage began as a business arrangement. I have no right to expect loyalty beyond what such an arrangement requires. Alistair reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes directly. Our marriage may have begun as a business arrangement, Elena, but it has become something far more significant to me. I care for you, deeply, and I have no intention of abandoning you to face this threat alone, regardless of what scandal or complication may arise from your father's involvement. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, though she blinked them back with visible effort. You truly mean that? I have never meant anything more sincerely in my entire life, Alistair said firmly. For a long moment, they simply stood together, the weight of unspoken emotion finally finding acknowledgement between them. Then, slowly, Alistair leaned forward, giving Elena every opportunity to step back if she wished. She did not step back. Instead, she closed the remaining distance herself, and their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss that carried within it every unspoken feeling that had grown between them since the day of their convenient, calculated wedding. When they finally parted, Elena's expression carried a soft wonder that Alistair had never witnessed from her before. I did not expect this, she whispered. When I agreed to marry you, I never imagined feeling anything beyond gratitude for the security you offered. Nor did I imagine feeling anything beyond relief at solving my inheritance crisis, Alistair admitted with a small smile. Yet here we are. Here we are, Elena agreed softly, leaning into him as he wrapped his arms around her, the two of them standing together as the last light of evening faded outside the windows of Ravensworth Hall. But even as they found comfort in this newfound closeness, the threat of Edmund's investigation and the potential involvement of Elena's father continued to loom over their future, an unresolved storm gathering strength on the horizon, waiting to test the fragile happiness they had only just begun to discover together. That night, unable to sleep despite the emotional exhaustion of the day's events, Elena sat alone in her private chambers, staring at the small wooden box she had kept hidden for 6 years, the one containing the few remaining possessions from her former life as Lady Elena Whitmore. She retrieved it now, unlocking it with the small brass key she had carried on a chain around her neck since the day of her flight, and opened it carefully. Inside lay a few pieces of jewelry too valuable to sell without risking recognition, a faded photograph of her mother who had passed away when Elena was only 12 years old, and a single letter, unopened, that she had written to her father shortly after her flight, but never found the courage to send. She held the letter now, turning it over in her hands, wondering if the time had finally come to send the words she had written 6 years earlier, words explaining why she had fled, why she could not accept the marriage he had arranged, words that might, even now, offer some path toward reconciliation rather than confrontation. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, and she quickly closed the box before calling for the visitor to enter. Alistair stepped inside, his expression concerned as he noticed the tears that had gathered unbidden in her eyes. I could not sleep either, he said simply, moving to sit beside her. I thought perhaps you might appreciate company. Elena leaned against him gratefully, showing him the unopened letter clutched in her hands. I wrote this to my father shortly after I fled, explaining everything, hoping perhaps he might understand my reasons, even if he could not forgive them. I never found the courage to send it. Do you think you might send it now? Alistair asked gently. Elena considered the question carefully. I do not know. Part of me fears that reaching out will only accelerate whatever confrontation is already coming, that it would be wiser to let Edmund and my father discover the truth on their own terms, rather than inviting the conflict directly. And the other part of you? The other part of me is tired, Elena admitted. Tired of hiding. Tired of carrying secrets alone. Tired of wondering what my father truly felt when he believed me lost or dead these past 6 years. Perhaps reaching out, even now, even under these complicated circumstances, might finally bring some resolution to a wound I have carried for far too long. Alistair wrapped his arm around her shoulders, offering silent support as she wrestled with the difficult decision before her. Whatever you decide, Elena, I will support you. This is your choice to make, not mine or Edmund's, or even your father's. Elena looked up at him with grateful eyes. Thank you for that, Alistair. For giving me the space to decide this on my own terms, after so many years of feeling like my choices belonged to everyone but myself. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, the letter resting between them, representing years of pain and uncertainty that neither of them could fully resolve that night. But in the warmth of Alistair's presence beside her, Elena felt, for the first time in 6 years, that whatever choice she ultimately made, She would not have to face the consequences entirely alone. The bell rang out across the estate grounds just past midnight, a frantic clanging that jolted Alistair from a rare, peaceful sleep. He was on his feet and pulling on his boots before he had fully registered what the sound meant, his instincts from years of naval service kicking in immediately. "Fire!" Finch shouted from the hallway, his voice carrying urgency that needed no further explanation. "The tenant cottages near the eastern boundary, Your Grace. The wind is carrying flames toward 3 families' homes." Elena appeared in the doorway of her chambers already dressed, her hair hastily pinned, her expression sharp with determination rather than panic. "I am coming with you. Elena, it may be dangerous. Those families need every capable hand available." Elena interrupted firmly. "I have dealt with worse than fire in my life, Alistair. I am not staying behind while others suffer." There was no time to argue, and truthfully, Alistair found himself grateful for her insistence rather than frustrated by it. They rode together toward the eastern boundary, the glow of flames visible against the night sky long before they arrived at the scene of chaos. 3 cottages stood in various stages of danger, the closest already partially engulfed, its inhabitants standing helplessly nearby, as household staff and nearby tenants formed a hasty bucket line from the estate's well. Children cried in the arms of frightened mothers, while men shouted instructions that seemed to contradict one another in the confusion of the moment. Alistair immediately took charge, his commanding presence cutting through the disorder with practiced ease. "Form 2 lines," he called out, his voice carrying clearly over the roar of the flames. "One from the well, one from the pond beyond the eastern field. We need water reaching the fire from multiple directions if we hope to contain it before it spreads further." Elena moved quickly among the frightened families, her calm presence having an immediate steadying effect on the chaos. She organized the children into a safer area, away from the smoke, directed the elderly and injured toward the estate's main house, where Mrs. Higgins had already begun preparing space to receive them, and coordinated with the mothers to ensure every family member was accounted for. "The Hartley family," she called out to Alistair over the noise. "Their youngest child is still missing. Mrs. Hartley believes he may have run back inside for his favorite toy before the fire spread to that section." Alistair's blood ran cold at the news. Without hesitation, he moved toward the burning cottage, ignoring the shouts of concern from the men working the bucket lines. "Alistair, wait!" Elena's voice cut through his focus, but he did not slow his pace. "I cannot leave a child inside that building," he called back over his shoulder. He entered the smoke-filled cottage, his eyes stinging immediately from the acrid air, his lungs protesting against every breath. He called out for the child, moving carefully through rooms increasingly obscured by dark smoke, the heat growing more intense with each step deeper into the structure. He found the boy, no older than 5, huddled beneath a small bed in the back room, clutching a wooden toy horse, and crying softly from fear rather than injury. Alistair scooped him up immediately, cradling him protectively, as he retraced his steps toward the entrance, the ceiling above beginning to groan ominously from the heat. He emerged from the cottage just as a section of the roof collapsed behind him, sparks scattering into the night air as the crowd outside cried out in relief at his safe return. He handed the child to his waiting, weeping mother, before turning to find Elena, who rushed toward him with an expression of relief so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. "You foolish, brave man," Elena said, her voice breaking, as she checked him over for injuries, finding only minor scrapes and the lingering effects of smoke inhalation. "You could have been killed." "I could not leave a child to face that alone," Alistair said simply, coughing slightly from the smoke still clinging to his lungs. Elena embraced him fiercely, uncaring of the soot covering his clothing, or the smell of smoke that permeated everything around them. "Do not ever frighten me like that again." "I will try my best," Alistair said with a weak smile, though the warmth in his chest at her genuine concern outweighed any discomfort from his brief venture into danger. The remainder of the night passed in exhausting, but ultimately successful effort. The combined labor of the household staff, tenant families, and Alistair himself eventually brought the flames under control, saving 2 of the 3 threatened cottages entirely, and preventing the fire from spreading further into the surrounding fields. The 3rd cottage, though badly damaged, remained structurally sound enough to be repaired rather than rebuilt entirely. As dawn began to break over the exhausted, soot-covered gathering, Alistair addressed the affected families personally, promising immediate resources for rebuilding and temporary housing within the main estate, until repairs could be completed. His genuine concern for their welfare, evident in every word and action throughout the crisis, earned him a depth of loyalty and gratitude that no amount of ceremonial duty could have manufactured. Elena watched him move among the tenants, offering comfort and practical assistance in equal measure, and felt something within her chest swell with an emotion she could no longer deny or resist. This was not merely the Duke who had married her out of convenient necessity. This was a man of genuine character, someone who risked his own safety without hesitation to save a frightened child, someone who cared deeply for the well-being of every person under his protection. "You are remarkable," she said quietly, when he finally returned to her side, exhaustion evident in every line of his soot-stained face. "I merely did what any decent person would do," Alistair replied. "Not every duke would have entered a burning building for a tenant's child," Elena said. "Not every man in your position would have risked everything for someone who could offer him nothing in return beyond gratitude." Alistair studied her carefully, noting the emotion evident in her expression, despite her attempts to maintain composure. "You speak as though you expected less of me." "I expected less of everyone, once," Elena admitted. "My father taught me, through years of cold calculation and conditional affection, that most people act only in their own self-interest, that genuine selflessness is rare enough to be treated with suspicion rather than trust. Tonight, you proved that lesson wrong in the most profound way possible." "Then perhaps," Alistair said softly, reaching out to brush a streak of soot from her cheek, "it is time you learned new lessons, ones that better reflect the man standing before you now, rather than the father who failed you so completely in your youth." Elena leaned into his touch, her eyes glistening with unshed tears born not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. "I think I have already begun learning those lessons, Alistair. Every day since our marriage, you have taught me something new about trust, about genuine partnership, about the possibility of finding safety, not merely in financial security, but in the character of the person beside me." They stood together as the sun fully rose over the exhausted estate. The crisis of the night finally passed, replaced by the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated when they first agreed to their marriage of convenience. The events of the fire, the shared danger and relief, the vulnerability displayed by both of them in caring so deeply for each other's safety, had cemented a bond that transcended the practical arrangement they had originally negotiated. In the days that followed, as the estate slowly recovered from the crisis and rebuilding began on the damaged cottage, Alistair and Elena found themselves growing closer with each passing hour. Their conversations, once carefully guarded and limited to practical matters, expanded into genuine intimacy, shared dreams and fears, hopes for a future they had not previously dared to imagine together. Elena finally decided to send the letter she had written to her father 6 years earlier, though she added a new postscript explaining her current circumstances and her marriage to the Duke of Ravensworth. She sealed it with trembling hands, uncertain what response, if any, it might provoke, but feeling a sense of peace in finally taking control of her own narrative, rather than allowing fear to dictate her silence any longer. "Whatever happens now," she told Alistair, as she handed the letter to Finch for delivery, "I feel ready to face it. Whether my father responds with anger, indifference, or something entirely unexpected, I no longer feel the need to hide from my past." "I am proud of you," Alistair said, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "That courage took years to build, and I am honored to witness you finally claiming it fully." Elena smiled up at him, a genuine expression of happiness that had grown increasingly frequent in recent days. "I could not have found this courage alone. You have given me something I did not know I needed, a partnership built on genuine respect and care rather than mere convenience or obligation." Their moment of peace, however, would prove short-lived. Within days of sending the letter, word arrived that would test everything they had built together, threatening to unravel the fragile happiness they had only just begun to discover in each other's company. Edmund's investigation had finally borne fruit, and his solicitor had uncovered documentation proving Elena's true identity as the estranged daughter of the Earl of Camden. Armed with this information, Edmund wasted no time in preparing to use it as leverage, sending word that he intended to visit Ravensworth Hall once more, this time with proof in hand, and demands that would test the very foundation of Alistair and Elena's marriage. The peace they had found together, forged through shared danger and growing intimacy, was about to face its most severe test yet. as the secrets Elena had guarded for 6 years finally came fully into the light, threatening to reshape not only their marriage, but the very future of the Ravensworth estate itself. Edmund arrived at Ravensworth Hall 3 days later, this time without the pretense of friendly congratulations. He strode into the drawing room with the confidence of a man who believed he finally held every advantage, his solicitor, Mr. Pratt, trailing behind him with a leather case that seemed to weigh far more heavily than mere paper should allow. Alistair and Elena received him together, standing united despite the anxiety evident in Elena's tightly clasped hands. Lord Ashford, who had returned to Ravensworth Hall 2 days earlier with legal counsel of his own, stood nearby, his presence offering a measure of reassurance against whatever scheme Edmund had devised. "Cousin," Edmund said, his tone carrying triumphant satisfaction, "I trust you are prepared for a most illuminating conversation." "Say what you have come to say, Edmund," Alistair replied evenly. "We have little patience remaining for your theatrics." Edmund gestured to Mr. Pratt, who withdrew a stack of documents from his leather case and placed them carefully on the table between them. "My solicitor has completed a thorough investigation into your wife's true identity, Your Grace. I believe you will find the results most illuminating." Alistair did not need to examine the documents to know their contents, having already learned the truth directly from Elena weeks earlier. "You have confirmed that my wife was born Lady Elena Whitmore, daughter of the Earl of Camden. This is not news to me, Edmund." Edmund's confident expression faltered slightly, clearly having expected the revelation to land with far greater shock. "You already knew?" "I have known for some time," Alistair confirmed. "My wife's history is her own to share, and she chose to share it with me freely, without deception or coercion." "Then perhaps you also know," Edmund continued, recovering his composure, "that Lady Elena's father arranged a marriage for her 6 years ago, one she fled rather than honor, a marriage contract that, according to the laws governing noble alliances, may still hold legal weight regardless of her subsequent flight and change of identity." Elena's face paled slightly at this new threat, one she had not fully considered in her calculations of potential consequences. "That arrangement was never formally completed. I fled before any legal ceremony took place." "Perhaps," Edmund said smoothly, "but I have consulted extensively with Mr. Pratt on this matter, and it appears the contract your father signed on your behalf carries binding provisions that survive even in the absence of a completed ceremony, provided the intended groom still wishes to pursue the arrangement." "What are you suggesting?" Alistair demanded, his patience thinning rapidly. "I am suggesting," Edmund said, clearly relishing the moment, "that if the intended groom from Lady Elena's original arranged marriage were to press his claim, citing the binding contract her father signed years ago, your marriage to her could be challenged as invalid, since she was already legally promised to another man at the time she married you. This would, of course, invalidate the marriage clause requirement you satisfied by marrying her, returning the Ravensworth estate to its rightful line of succession." "Meaning yourself," Alistair said coldly. "Meaning myself," Edmund confirmed with an unashamed smile. Lord Ashford stepped forward at this point, his diplomatic training evident in the measured calm of his voice. "Mr. Caro, I believe you may be operating under a misunderstanding of the legal particulars involved. Marriage contracts of the nature you describe generally require formal registration and acknowledgement by both parties involved, neither of which occurred in Lady Elena's case, given her departure prior to the ceremony." "A technicality that skilled legal argument could easily overcome," Edmund countered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face at Ashford's confident challenge. "Perhaps," Ashford said smoothly, "though I should mention that I have also consulted with legal counsel on this matter, gentlemen, with considerable experience in exactly this type of dispute. They assure me that Lady Elena's clear and documented refusal of the arranged marriage, combined with the absence of any formal ceremony or registration, renders any claim to a binding contract extremely weak, likely to fail entirely should it ever reach formal legal proceedings." Edmund's confidence wavered visibly now, his careful scheme beginning to show cracks under the weight of Ashford's counter-argument. "Even if the legal claim proves weak, the scandal alone could damage your reputation irreparably, cousin. Society does not look kindly upon dukes who marry women with such complicated hidden pasts." "Then let society judge as it will," Alistair said firmly. stepping closer to Elena and taking her hand in a gesture of unwavering solidarity. I married Elena because I came to value her intelligence, her compassion, and her courage, far beyond any consideration of her birth or history. If society cannot accept a marriage built on genuine respect and affection, then society's judgment holds little value to me. You would risk everything, your reputation, your standing among your peers, for a woman who deceived you about her true identity from the very beginning of your marriage? Edmund pressed, clearly grasping for any remaining leverage. She did not deceive me, Alistair replied firmly. She protected herself from a father who valued alliance over affection, from a forced marriage that would have destroyed her spirit and happiness entirely. I understand her reasons completely, and I stand beside her without hesitation or regret. Elena squeezed his hand gratefully, her eyes shining with emotion at his unwavering defense. She then turned to address Edmund directly, her voice carrying newfound strength and confidence. Mr. Caro, I have spent 6 years running from my past, allowing fear to dictate every choice I made. I am done running. If you wish to pursue legal action against our marriage, do so, but know that I will fight you with every resource available to me, including the truth of my father's cruelty and the genuine love I have found with my husband. The word love hung in the air, and Alistair felt his heart swell at hearing Elena speak it openly for the first time, even amid the tension of the confrontation. Edmund studied both of them carefully, seeming to finally recognize that his scheme had failed to achieve its intended effect. Their unity, rather than the scandal and shame he had anticipated, presented a formidable obstacle to his ambitions. "This is not finished," Edmund said, though his voice carried far less confidence than when he had first entered the room. "I will continue exploring every possible avenue to reclaim what should rightfully be mine." "You are welcome to try," Alistair said calmly, "but I would advise you to consider carefully whether continued harassment of my wife and our marriage is truly the wisest use of your resources, particularly given the weak legal ground you appear to be standing upon." Edmund gathered his documents and his composure with visible effort, offering a stiff bow before departing, with Mr. Pratt trailing uncertainly behind him. The room remained silent for a long moment after his departure, the tension of the confrontation slowly beginning to ease. "Do you truly believe his claim holds no legal weight?" Elena asked Ashford once she trusted her voice to remain steady. "I am confident in that assessment," Ashford replied. "The legal counsel I consulted specializes precisely in matters of contested marriage contracts, and they were unanimous in their opinion that Mr. Caro's claim would fail spectacularly if pursued through formal legal channels. His threat, I believe, relied more on the fear of scandal than any genuine legal standing." "Then why does the threat still feel so significant?" Elena asked quietly. Alistair pulled her gently into his embrace, offering comfort as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving exhaustion and lingering anxiety in its wake. "Because fear does not always respond to logic, even when logic clearly favors our position. You have carried this fear for 6 years, Elena. It will take time for it to fully release its grip on you, even now that we have successfully countered Edmund's scheme." "Thank you," Elena said, looking between Alistair and Ashford with genuine gratitude. "Both of you, for standing beside me through this. I do not know how I would have faced this confrontation alone." "You will never have to face anything alone again," Alistair promised, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "That is a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives together." As evening settled over Ravensworth Hall, bringing with it a sense of relief and cautious optimism, a new messenger arrived at the gates, carrying a letter sealed with an unfamiliar crest. Finch delivered it to Elena with visible apprehension, recognizing the significance the seal likely carried. Elena's hands trembled as she broke the seal, immediately recognizing her father's handwriting after 6 long years of separation. Alistair stood close beside her, offering silent support as she read the contents, her expression shifting through a complex progression of emotions that ranged from fear to disbelief to something that looked remarkably like cautious hope. "What does it say?" Alistair asked gently, once she had finished reading. Elena looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her face, though her expression carried none of the dread he had anticipated. "My father wishes to meet with us. He says he has spent 6 years regretting the choices that drove me away, and he wishes to make amends, if I am willing to grant him that opportunity." "Do you believe him?" Alistair asked carefully. "I do not know. Elena admitted honestly. But perhaps it is time I found out, rather than continuing to run from the possibility of reconciliation, out of fear alone. Alistair squeezed her hand supportively. Then we shall face this next chapter together, exactly as we have faced everything else since this remarkable journey began. Elena nodded, drawing strength from his presence beside her, ready to confront whatever revelations and challenges still awaited them, as the final threads of her hidden past finally began to weave themselves into the fabric of the new life she had built at Ravensworth Hall. The Earl of Camden arrived at Ravensworth Hall on a crisp morning 2 weeks later, his carriage bearing the family crest Elena had spent 6 years trying to forget. Alistair stood beside her in the courtyard, as the carriage rolled to a stop, feeling the tension radiating from his wife despite her outward composure. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "I am here beside you." Elena nodded, drawing strength from his presence as the carriage door opened and a tall, silver-haired man stepped down, his expression carrying none of the cold calculation Elena had described from her memories of him. Instead, his eyes, so similar to Elena's own, carried an unmistakable weight of grief and regret as they settled upon his long-lost daughter. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking slightly on her name. "Father," Elena replied cautiously, her guard still firmly in place, despite the emotion evident in his expression. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of 6 years of separation and pain hanging heavily between them. Finally, the Earl took a hesitant step forward. "I have spent every day since your disappearance wondering if you were alive, wondering if the last words we exchanged would truly be the last words we ever shared. I cannot express the relief I felt upon learning you were safe, that you had built a life for yourself, even if that life began far from the comfort and privilege you were born into. You forced me into an impossible position, Father," Elena said, her voice steadier now, carrying 6 years of accumulated pain that demanded acknowledgement. "You valued alliance over my happiness, treated me as a bargaining piece rather than your daughter. I had no choice but to flee, regardless of the danger and uncertainty that path presented." The Earl's expression crumbled slightly, genuine remorse evident in every line of his aging face. "You are right to condemn my choices. In the years since your disappearance, I have had ample time to reflect on the mistakes I made, the ways I failed you as a father in pursuit of ambitions that, in retrospect, mattered far less than I believed at the time." "What changed your perspective?" Elena asked, still cautious despite the apparent sincerity of his words. "Your mother's memory mostly," the Earl admitted. "She always believed I valued position and alliance too highly, that I failed to see the genuine worth of the people around me, including my own daughter. Her words haunted me increasingly, as the years passed without any word of your fate. I began to understand, far too late, that I had driven away the very person who most reminded me of her spirit and intelligence." Elena's composure wavered slightly at the mention of her mother, tears gathering in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain her guarded stance. "I have missed her every day since she passed. I often wondered if she would have approved of the choices I made in fleeing, rather than accepting the marriage you arranged." "She would have been proud of you," the Earl said firmly, "prouder than I have ever deserved to feel of myself, given how I handled the situation." Alistair, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally stepped forward. "Lord Camden, I am Alistair Grayson, Duke of Ravensworth. I understand this reunion carries significant emotional weight, and I do not wish to interrupt. But I must ask directly what your intentions are regarding your daughter's marriage to me." The Earl turned to regard Alistair with careful assessment, the diplomatic instincts of a man accustomed to noble negotiations evident in his measured response. "Your Grace, I have no intention of challenging your marriage or attempting to reclaim authority over my daughter. I have learned, through painful experience, the cost of trying to control her life against her own wishes. I am here only to seek reconciliation, if she is willing to grant it, and to offer my blessing upon a union that appears to have brought her genuine happiness." "And the arranged marriage from 6 years ago?" Alistair pressed. "My cousin has suggested the contract you signed might still carry legal weight, threatening the validity of my marriage to Elena." The Earl's expression grew grave. "I have already addressed that matter, Your Grace. Upon learning of my daughter's marriage, and the threats being made against it, I contacted the family involved in the original arranged marriage myself. They have agreed to formally dissolve any remaining claim to the contract, understanding that pursuing such a matter after 6 years, against a marriage already legitimately entered into, would serve no reasonable purpose beyond causing unnecessary scandal for all parties involved. Relief flooded through Alistair at this news, though he remained cautiously attentive to any further complications the Earl's visit might reveal. "That is a considerable relief, Lord Camden. Thank you for taking action to resolve that particular threat." "It was the least I could do," the Earl said, "given the pain my original choices caused my daughter. I only hope that in time, she might find it within herself to forgive an old man for the mistakes of his younger, more foolish years." Elena studied her father carefully, weighing the sincerity of his words against the painful memories she had carried for 6 long years. Finally, she stepped forward, closing some of the physical distance that had separated them since his arrival. "I cannot promise instant forgiveness, Father," she said honestly. "The wounds you caused run deep, and rebuilding trust will take time and genuine effort on both our parts. But I am willing to try, if you are equally willing to respect the boundaries and choices I have made in building this new life for myself." The Earl's eyes filled with tears of genuine gratitude and hope. "That is more than I deserve, Elena, and more than I dared hope for when I set out on this journey to see you again. I am willing to respect whatever boundaries you require, and I am grateful beyond words for the opportunity to begin rebuilding what my own foolishness nearly destroyed forever." Over the following days, the Earl remained as a guest at Ravensworth Hall, and slowly, cautiously, father and daughter began the difficult work of reconciliation. Alistair watched with quiet satisfaction as Elena gradually allowed herself to trust her father's genuine remorse, as small moments of warmth began to replace the cold distance that had characterized their initial reunion. Meanwhile, news of the Earl's support for Elena's marriage, combined with the dissolution of any remaining claim to her original arranged contract, effectively destroyed whatever remaining leverage Edmund had hoped to wield against Alistair and Elena's union. When Edmund attempted one final visit to Ravensworth Hall, hoping to salvage some remnant of his scheme, he found himself confronted not only by a united Alistair and Elena, but by the Earl of Camden himself, whose diplomatic authority and clear support for the marriage left Edmund with no remaining avenue for challenge. "I believe your investigation has reached its natural conclusion, Mr. Caro," the Earl said coldly, his diplomatic bearing carrying an authority that immediately diminished Edmund's remaining confidence. "My daughter's marriage stands on solid legal ground, blessed by her own father, and free of any competing claims. I would strongly advise you to abandon this pursuit entirely, before your own reputation suffers from the scandal of harassing a legitimately married duchess and her family." Edmund, recognizing the complete collapse of his scheme, offered a stiff, humiliated bow before departing Ravensworth Hall for the final time, his ambitions for the title and estate thoroughly and permanently thwarted. With the immediate threats finally resolved, Alistair and Elena found themselves able to fully embrace the genuine happiness that had grown between them throughout their tumultuous journey together. The marriage that had begun as a practical solution to a legal crisis had transformed, through shared hardship and mutual respect, into a partnership built on genuine love and trust. One evening, several weeks after the Earl's departure back to his own estate with promises of continued correspondence and future visits, Alistair found Elena in the garden, where they had shared their first true conversation about the depth of their feelings for one another. The autumn flowers had long since faded, replaced now by the first hints of winter frost, but the warmth between them remained undiminished by the changing seasons. "I have been thinking," Alistair said, joining her on the garden bench where she sat watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "About what?" Elena asked, leaning comfortably against his shoulder. "About how strange life can be," Alistair said thoughtfully. "I married you out of desperate necessity, believing I was securing a practical solution to save my estate from ruin. I never imagined that decision would lead me to discover not only a woman of remarkable intelligence and courage, but genuine love that I did not believe myself capable of feeling so completely." Elena smiled softly, turning to meet his eyes. "I felt much the same, though perhaps for different reasons. I agreed to marry you believing I was securing safety and security, a practical arrangement that would protect me from destitution while asking nothing more of me than the appearance of a proper marriage. I never anticipated finding a partner who would stand beside me through every threat and revelation. who would love me not despite my complicated past, but because of the resilience and strength that past had forged within me. You mentioned love before. During our confrontation with Edmund, Alistair said softly, I have wanted to ask you since that moment whether you truly meant it, or whether it was simply a strategic declaration meant to strengthen our position against his threats. Elena's expression grew tender as she reached up to gently touch his face. I meant every word, Alistair. I love you, completely and without reservation. What began as a business arrangement has become the truest, most meaningful relationship of my entire life. I love you as well, Alistair replied, his voice carrying the full weight of genuine emotion. More than I ever believed possible, and certainly far more than I anticipated when I first proposed our practical arrangement all those months ago. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, the first stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky above Ravensworth Hall. The estate that had once faced ruin now stood secure, its future guaranteed not merely by the technical fulfillment of an inheritance clause, but by a genuine partnership built on love, respect, and shared resilience through adversity. In the months that followed, Elena continued her work managing various aspects of the estate, her sharp intelligence and diplomatic skills earning her increasing respect not only from the household staff and tenants, but from the broader society that had once whispered scandalously about the Duke's unusual marriage. As word spread of her true heritage as the daughter of the Earl of Camden, combined with the evident genuine affection between her and Alistair, the initial scandal transformed gradually into admiration for a love story that had triumphed over deception, threat, and the machinations of a scheming relative. Edmund, thoroughly disgraced by his failed attempts to challenge the marriage and reclaim the estate, eventually withdrew from society's notice entirely, his ambitions permanently crushed by the strength and unity Alistair and Elena had displayed throughout his campaign against them. The relationship between Elena and her father continued to heal, slowly but steadily, punctuated by regular correspondence and occasional visits that gradually rebuilt the trust his earlier choices had shattered. Though their relationship would never fully erase the pain of those 6 lost years, both father and daughter found genuine comfort in the reconciliation they had achieved, a testament to the possibility of redemption even after significant harm. As for Alistair and Elena, their marriage flourished in ways neither could have anticipated when they first entered into their practical arrangement. The Duke, who had married a plain maid to save his estate, discovered instead a woman of remarkable depth, courage, and intelligence, a true partner, whose hidden noble birth mattered far less to him than the genuine character she had displayed throughout every trial they faced together. Standing together at the estate's boundary one final time as this chapter of their story drew to its close, watching the sun rise over land that was now secure and prosperous under their joint stewardship, Alistair turned to Elena with a smile that carried the full weight of their journey together. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Elena shook her head, her eyes bright with genuine happiness. "Not a single one. Every difficult moment, every hidden secret, every threat we faced together, led us precisely to this moment, to this life we have built together. I would not change a single step of that journey, difficult as it often was." "Nor would I," Alistair agreed, pulling her close as the morning light illuminated the estate they had saved together, not merely through legal technicality, but through the genuine love and partnership that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. Their story, once whispered about with scandal and doubt, had become instead a testament to the truth that genuine character and love mattered far more than birth or circumstance, a lesson that would echo through Ravensworth Hall for generations to come. 2 years passed at Ravensworth Hall, and the estate that had once teetered on the edge of financial ruin now stood as one of the most prosperous holdings in the county. Elena's careful management of the accounts, combined with Alistair's renewed dedication to the well-being of his tenants, had transformed what was once a burden into a thriving legacy that drew admiration from neighboring estates and even grudging respect from those who had once mocked the Duke's unconventional marriage. The gardens Elena had tended so carefully during those first uncertain months had grown lush and full, a reflection of the life she had built within their walls. She often walked among the roses in early morning, watching the mist rise from the fields beyond, thinking of how far she had traveled from the frightened young woman who had fled her father's household with nothing but a small bag of coins and a heart full of determination. Their household had grown as well. A daughter, named Margaret after Elena's late mother, had arrived the previous spring, filling the halls of Ravensworth with laughter and the particular chaos that only a small child could bring. Alistair proved himself a devoted father, spending hours each evening reading to his daughter despite the many demands of managing the estate, a tenderness that surprised even those who had known him longest. Mrs. Higgins often remarked to Finch that she had never seen a household transform so completely, from one defined by quiet duty and formal distance to one filled with genuine warmth and connection. The staff, who had once viewed Elena as merely one of their own, elevated by unusual circumstance, now regarded her with a respect that had grown organically from her fairness and competence, rather than her title alone. The Earl of Camden visited twice yearly now, his relationship with Elena having healed into something resembling the bond they might have shared, had his earlier ambitions not driven them apart. He doted on his granddaughter with an affection that seemed to ease some of the guilt he still carried for the years of separation his choices had caused. Elena watched these visits with a complicated mixture of lingering caution and genuine gladness, grateful that time and consistent effort had allowed something valuable to be salvaged from the wreckage of her early life. Lord Ashford remained a close family friend, his loyalty during their most difficult trial having earned him a permanent place in their circle of trust. He often visited Ravensworth Hall on his travels between diplomatic postings, bringing news of the wider world and occasionally useful advice on matters of estate management that his years of experience had taught him. Edmund Carow, meanwhile, had faded almost entirely from their lives. Word occasionally reached them of his diminished circumstances, his reputation having never recovered from the public failure of his scheme against their marriage. Alistair felt no satisfaction in his cousin's downfall, though he could not deny a measure of relief that the persistent threat had finally dissolved into irrelevance. One autumn evening, as golden light filtered through the windows of the study where so much of their story had begun, Alistair found Elena reviewing the estate ledgers with the same careful attention she had brought to that very desk on the night she first revealed her extraordinary talent for numbers. Margaret slept peacefully in a cradle nearby, her small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of contented childhood sleep. "Do you ever think back to that first night?" Alistair asked, settling into the chair across from her. "When you discovered the errors in these very ledgers, and I first began to suspect there was far more to you than anyone realized?" Elena looked up, a soft smile playing across her lips. "Often. It seems impossible now that we were once strangers, bound only by necessity, that I once feared revealing even the smallest truth about myself to the man I would come to love more than I ever believed possible." "We have come a long way from that arrangement," Alistair agreed. "I confess, when I first proposed our practical marriage, I could not have imagined the life we have built together. A daughter, a thriving estate, a genuine partnership that has weathered every storm thrown against it." "Life has a way of surprising us," Elena said, closing the ledger and rising to join him, taking his hand as she had done so many times since that fateful confrontation with Edmund in this very room. "I spent so many years believing that safety meant hiding, that happiness required erasing every trace of who I truly was. You taught me otherwise, Alistair. You showed me that genuine safety comes not from concealment, but from being fully known and fully accepted." "And you taught me," Alistair replied, pulling her gently into his embrace, "that a marriage built initially on practical necessity could grow into something far richer than I ever dared hope for. That love, genuine and lasting, could emerge from the most unlikely of beginnings." Their daughter stirred slightly in her cradle, and Elena moved to soothe her back to peaceful sleep, her movements carrying the easy confidence of a mother who had found genuine contentment in every aspect of her transformed life. Alistair watched them both with a swelling heart, grateful beyond measure for the strange twist of fate that had brought this remarkable woman into his life during his moment of greatest desperation. As winter approached and the estate prepared for the coming season, word arrived of a grand gathering planned in the county, a celebration to honor the harvest and the prosperity that had returned to the region after years of hardship. Alistair and Elena were invited as guests of honor, a stark contrast to the scandal and whispered gossip that had once surrounded their unusual marriage. At the gathering, held in the grand hall of a neighboring estate, Elena moved among the assembled nobility with a grace and confidence that reflected both her true noble birth and the hard-won wisdom of her years in hiding. Several attendees who had once looked down upon the Duke's marriage to a former household maid now sought her counsel on matters of estate management, her reputation for fairness and intelligence having spread throughout the county. "You have transformed how society views our marriage," Alistair observed as they danced together beneath the grand chandeliers, Elena moving with an elegance that revealed the training of her early years as an earl's daughter. "We transformed it together," Elena corrected gently. "Your unwavering support during every trial we faced proved to society that genuine character matters more than birth or circumstance. I merely provided the proof that hard work and integrity can overcome even the most challenging of beginnings." "Whatever the cause," Alistair said, spinning her gracefully across the dance floor, "I find myself grateful every single day for the circumstances that brought us together, however unconventional our beginning may have been." As the evening wore on, and the celebration continued around them, Alistair found a quiet moment to lead Elena onto a private balcony, overlooking the moonlit gardens below. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, but neither of them minded, wrapped as they were in the warmth of their shared happiness. "I have something for you," Alistair said, reaching into his coat and withdrawing a small velvet box. Elena's eyes widened with surprise. "Alistair, what is this?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace, its design incorporating both an English rose, representing her adopted identity as Elena Marsh, and a small emblem matching the Camden family crest, representing her true heritage, as Lady Elena Whitmore. "I commissioned this to represent both halves of who you are," Alistair explained, "the woman who found strength in hiding, and the woman who found even greater strength in finally revealing her true self. I wanted you to have something that celebrates your entire journey, rather than asking you to choose between the identities that have shaped you." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as Alistair gently fastened the necklace around her neck, the two symbols resting together in perfect harmony against her skin. "It is beautiful, Alistair. Thank you for understanding that I do not need to be only one thing, that both halves of my history have brought me to this moment of genuine happiness. You are, and always have been, entirely yourself," Alistair said softly. "Every part of your journey, difficult as it often was, shaped you into the remarkable woman I am fortunate enough to call my wife." They stood together on the balcony as the celebration continued below, the moonlight illuminating the necklace that now rested against Elena's skin, a permanent reminder of the extraordinary journey that had brought them from a desperate marriage of convenience to a love story that had triumphed over secrets, threats, and the doubts of a skeptical society. Their story, once defined by scandal and uncertainty, had become instead a lasting testament to the truth that genuine love could grow from even the most unlikely beginnings, that hidden pasts need not remain buried forever, and that true partnership required not the absence of secrets, but the courage to reveal them fully, and the strength to face whatever consequences followed together. As the final notes of music drifted from the grand hall behind them, Alistair and Elena remained on the balcony a while longer, content simply to stand together beneath the stars, grateful for every difficult step that had led them to this moment of complete and unshakable happiness.